Brave Were the People is quite an amazing song, and one that I think would lend itself quite well to doing kind of a dramatization in something like a music video. And that's how I want to explore this song at first, is to imagine such a dramatization. So picture yourself in a quiet scene in a comfortable home library. You're sitting in a recliner with your legs up, perhaps a warm cup of tea on the side table and a soft reading light, as you're looking at a book of history. And that history describes some important event, perhaps a great battle, the founding of a country, a great social movement, something like that. Anything that stands in marked contrast to the seemingly mundane world of our everyday lives. And then as we hear in like this instrumental arrangement from the Mystic Harp 2, and as it's often performed, the song begins with a slow segment, like a soloist singing the first verse. Brave were the people who lived in these hills. Something slow like that. And it's like you're reading the history as these words are sung, reflecting perhaps on the historical event. And clearly we have the feeling during this slow segment that we're looking back on history, looking back on the greatness of those who, as the song says, confronted the foe. And perhaps there's a little doubt in our minds, a little doubt in our self-reflection that, would we have done the same had we been involved in that time? Would we have come up to fulfill the great dharma that was being asked of us, like it says in the lyrics, to defend what is holy, to defend what is true? Our Lord on mankind did this duty bestow. Well, we're not so sure when we read this kind of history, and in a way we hesitate to face the examples given to us from the past, or we want to keep them comfortably resigned into history because they really offer us a challenge. They force us to make a decision in our own hearts about where we stand and whether we would accept the duty, even if it means loss of life and limb. And perhaps we even, reading such a book of history, would, sigh to ourselves with the thought, well, I could never have done that. Or who am I to claim any importance on the stage of history? But then comes a challenge from deep within ourselves. Why not? What is it that you're alive for? How did the great men and women of history become great? Something stirs in the soul, an energy of divine heroism. And that's what we get next in the song, if I can keep playing it here. We get this building, this guitar, the harp strumming that becomes stronger and stronger. So let me pause it there. So we have this building of energy, like it's building the strength in the third chakra there. And I like to picture this scene as, if you're familiar with the movie Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, where he's working with a magic diary, and he's writing into it and it's responding, and at one point the diary says, I can show you something, and this great light expands from the diary and then pulls Harry Potter into the history itself. And that's what I think is kind of being implied here with this gradual building and then this aggressive glissando on the harp that is like this thing explodes and then history suddenly becomes alive for you. So let me back it up a little bit and you can hear that building. And then it's very bright. History suddenly becomes alive. And it's not the pages of a dusty book, but in the living present. And the fullness of the piece expands, whether it's in instruments or the choir. You find yourself like you're in the heart of the action, in the heart of a great battle. It's like you've been transported back into history, and suddenly all this stuff is happening around you. And that's when we hear that verse again. So imagine you're seeing this great battle happen. And brave were the people who lived in these hills, brave the great warriors who confronted the foe, to defend what is holy, to defend what is true. Our Lord on mankind did this history bestow. And that strumming and that build up to that great glissando in this recording really, again, brought the energy into the third chakra and activated its inherent power. And so joining the battle, then we feel that strength there. We feel the strength of the warriors, whoever they may be. All the men and women who have fought and endured so much to defend truth, to defend what is holy, to give themselves so completely to some kind of dharmic action. And it's this then we understand that we feel that when the time comes, of course we would stand up for what we believe. Of course we would stand up for truth. Because this is the call of the soul in every age, to be brave, to give ourselves into some kind of a greater reality. Now, in this context, I want to pause for a moment in this idea of a music video dramatization and talk about how, I've reflected on what it must have felt like to actually be in some of these great conflicts of history, like World War II or the American Civil War or the Battle of Kurukshetra, that's the subject of the Mahabharata from India. And I really thought that, the soldiers involved at those times really understood, really felt in the depths of their soul that they were participating not just in something mundane, but something much bigger than themselves, something much bigger than even the battle at hand. Like they were participating in what you might call a kind of cosmic event. And that then to die, to be injured, to whatever it takes, to experience that as a willing participant is a clearly much higher dharma than to try to protect one's own life. And such a feeling, that power deep within that to a cosmic connection would really inspire the kind of self-sacrifice that we see in events like the Battle of Gettysburg or the invasion of Europe on D-Day in World War II. One would understand in those moments that such battles really need to be fought and that they need willing self-sacrifice. That's what you are being called to do. That's the dharma of this moment. And in this way, the soldiers were acting dharmically because what they were doing, and this is part of God's plan, the real dharma in those situations is to sacrifice the ego into something greater. Now, that greater may be a variety of different things, but for the individual, acting dharmically in that, to give themselves, surrender that sense of ego into something greater, is an uplifting experience. And so I find it very hard to believe that such acts of willing sacrifice, regardless of which side you are fighting on, if that's the consciousness you're in of giving yourself, it actually accrues very good karma to the soul. And Yogananda, in fact, said that in the movies, it's necessary to have a villain to help the audience love the hero. And the same is true then of history. To help humanity love the truth, great battles must be fought between light and darkness, and therefore somebody needs to play the role of villain, and that's a dharmic act for them. I think of the story of the Ramayana, in fact, where the great villain Ravana poses all these challenges to the hero Rama, which awakens our love for Rama. Yet it's said that Ravana in a previous incarnation was given a choice. It said, you can live 10 incarnations loving God before achieving final liberation, or you can live one incarnation hating God. And as a true devotee, a true lover of God, Ravana chose the latter because it would mean union with the beloved all the sooner. And thus he took on the role of villain to create the great epic of the Ramayana that has then served as inspiration for hundreds of generations since. And that story also really serves to illustrate that one-pointed concentration on God in the form of Rama, even if it's concentration in a negative way, in pure hatred, it's still one-pointed concentration, and that also is a true path to liberation, regardless of how that concentration actually manifests. So in Brave Were the People here, this powerful first verse really reminds us of the importance of dharmic action, which is action that leads to salvation, not necessarily action that has a particular outward effect. And in so many cases, it's not so much the cause for which you're fighting, but the fact, again, that you sacrifice the ego for the sake of that cause, whatever it may be. And that's then what happens, what we're told in the next verse of the song, which brings the energy from the third chakra up to the fourth. So returning now to our music video, imagine that you've been witnessing this intense action on a battlefield all around you, but then it fades off and disappears, and you can perceive instead not the intensity of the battle, but the long-standing repercussions of dharmic action, the vibrations that infuse not only the site of the battle, which you can feel when you visit places like Gettysburg, but bless the region and the state and even the country and the whole world. And that's what so think of these words in that context. Glad all our children, the generations that follow, who people these hills, glad in the vision their hearts understand. What became of past struggles? Now the records are still, but courage still lingers, giving strength to the land. Now there's a lot going on here. So again, as I mentioned, children refers to generations of descendants, not just our immediate children, but everyone who comes after us. They are the ones who get to enjoy, which is to say, be glad in, the fruits of our dharmic actions that we do today, especially as many individuals in the battles of the present will perish in that lifetime, and they may, in fact, be reincarnated as the children in one of those subsequent generations. And those who come after then also enjoy the vision their hearts understand, which is a poetic way of describing, I think, the deep gratitude that remains long after the battle. It's why every country has holidays of remembrance, not so much for the events of the past, but for the sacrifice of those who fought. That's what we're remembering, is the personal sacrifice, not the event that gave rise to that sacrifice. So that vision, that understanding of the heart is gratitude, not for the outcome of those past events, as the lyrics say, but for the courage that still lingers, giving strength to the land. That is, we don't so much remember the specific deeds. That's the now the records. What became of past struggles? Now the records are still. But we remember the strength and the courage expressed through those deeds, and the courage is, again, the strength, the dharma, is what infuses the site of the event. It infuses the region, the state, the nation, and even in some cases with the significance, real significance, it affects all humanity. And those blessings infuse the whole world, where there is truly a dharmic action. Purely dharmic action is a blessing for the whole world. So the second verse has shifted us from being immersed in the battle or a struggle to a retrospective historical view, which is also the view of a higher perspective, you might say. And in the third verse, then, we are moving the energy up to the expansiveness of the throat chakra, and we go so far as to observe like a vast panorama of history across many such events. So we've gone from the specific to seeing the repercussions of the specific, to now lifting up and seeing that great panorama of history of all these different kinds of events and what they meant. And what is it that we then see? We first observe the commonplace tendencies of humankind. Men hunger for riches, for power, and for fame. By favor, they think they will grow. And then we begin to realize the deeper truth of that. We observe all these people doing that kind of activity, but we see the battles they fight, the victories they win, are never the victories they know. So in making these observations, we can see that true victory in life, the true victory for the souls, doesn't lie in the things that people normally seek to somehow make themselves immortal, power and riches and fames and even technological progress and so forth. And even seeking to do so-called important things in life doesn't necessarily produce the results that everyone seeks in the depths of their soul, which is true happiness. So as we learn in yoga with the principle of nishkam karma, it's how you perform an action, the consciousness with which you perform it. That's much more important than the results that we don't need to be attached to. We can be unattached to the results, but really put our best energy into how we do things. So that's to say that the consciousness, like the dharma of the battlefield, rather than the victory, what became of past struggles, now the records are still, but courage, the consciousness, that's what courage is saying, the consciousness still lingers, and the strong vibrations of that consciousness then bless the land. In our world today, we see many, many examples of people who are seeking power and riches and fame and immortality of some kind or another. And yet, upon observation, we see that they are no closer to happiness than when they started. That's the line, are never the victories they know. They don't find that victory of true inner happiness. They might, of course, they might get elected to a high office, perhaps even doing so dishonestly. They might acquire great wealth. They might extend their lifespan. They might do all of those things. But as the song says, those are hollow victories that matter little to the world and really to anyone else in the long run. Now in the spine, this verse here, men hunger for riches, it helps to purify the desires of the heart, the desires for power and riches and fame and so forth. And then when we go through the verse a second time, which serves to challenge the ego with the medulla, we're helping to purify the desires at that point as well. So we got the desires of the heart and the desires of the ego. And purifying both of those, we allow the energy to flow upwards to the spiritual eye. And it's now from this perspective of higher consciousness, having seen the great panorama of history and what really matters in the end, that we're kicked back out of this history book back into our comfortable library and our armchair and our cup of tea. And we hear that verse again, brave were the people that lived in these hills and so forth. But this time it's no longer dusty history. It's no longer something just merely intellectual. We realize it's a message that's meaningful for us right now because we are all engaged in battles every day. The battle against negative thoughts, negative emotions, selfishness, contractiveness, all the other forces of delusion. Because that is what Yogananda describes in his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. The real battle of Kurukshetra is the battle of our mental citizens in the spine, whether the forces of light or the forces of darkness will prevail. So the song is telling us, be brave, be dharmic, show valor, stand up in every moment for what's right, for what's necessary, for what you must do, and then go do it. That's why you're here. That's the Dharma. Don't be a coward. Don't be unwilling. Fight the battles that are right in front of you, no matter what they might be. And don't think that you have to do something important in the pages of history, something that people will recognize as such, because what matters most are the battles that you must fight, again, in your own self, that battle of Kurukshetra that's alive and well in every human being. So brave were the people is not really a call necessarily to engage in outward issues like fighting for social justice or taking action on climate change and so forth, even building a spiritual organization. It may be your dharma, of course, to do that, but it might also be your dharma to run a small business, to raise children, to tend a garden, or even to just bless the world with the depths of your meditations. So instead, the song is really saying that whatever your dharma is, put your energy into it, keep your consciousness high, and lo, generations to come, the children of the land, whether it be inside yourself or the generations of the world, will be blessed. So we can see then that brave were the people who easily counters a number of emotions, a lot of which are related to the negatives of cowardice and unwillingness, like reluctance, aversion, fearfulness, and discouragement. I used to sing this song when I was teaching my young son to ski. He was really challenged by making turns on more difficult slopes, and he was quite afraid of it because he's naturally cautious. And so that was a challenge to him. We had a few tears along the way, but with my encouragement, with the spirit of the song, which he really enjoyed, and the assurance that I said, just make one turn and then ditch. Just throw yourself down so you don't end up picking up too much speed or whatnot. He got through that challenge actually quite quickly. He made one turn and fell down purposely, and then he did another and fell down. Then he just made a couple of turns, and then he had it. And it took only a couple of minutes. And I think this song really helped overcome that unwillingness or a sense like that cowardness or that fearfulness that was in the face of that challenge. There's another type of discouragement too that's worth mentioning, and that's the type that arises not so much from failure itself, but from the inability to see purpose or meaning in your actions. That's really the consciousness of like cynicism and purposelessness, if I can say it right, which asks, why should I even bother? What difference will my actions make in the world? Now, the blindness of this kind of thinking really comes from defining words like making a difference and the world too broadly. Because if you think only in terms of, say, ending hunger for millions of people, then you're very likely going to set yourself up for disappointment and discouragement and then quitting on that kind of a mission. But if you define those goals first in a smaller scale, then you can definitely find a place to have meaningful impact. Solving hunger for a single person may not look important for the rest of the world, but it is certainly meaningful for that one person. And in fact, what this song is really telling us more than anything is a fundamental spiritual truth that if all your actions do is make a change in yourself to lift your consciousness even a little ways toward God, then those actions are truly meaningful in the great grand scheme of things where life is a quest for joy. As the song says, again, but courage, the vibrations of positive consciousness still linger, giving strength to the land. So if in that courage you uplift yourself, that's where things start. And if you can also instill courage and other positive qualities in other people, all the better. But truly your first responsibility is what's going on in your own heart and mind, because it's from there that any meaningful outward action then truly begins. Now, people do ask, isn't this just a kind of selfishness to be concerned about my own spiritual progress first? And shouldn't I put the needs of others ahead of my own? Well, it's true to some degree, but without allowing God to flow through us, what is it that we really have to give others to begin with? This is something Swami Ananda wrote in a place called Ananda. Let me read that excerpt here. He wrote, "An essential key to right living is to be guided by that which increases one's sense of inner freedom. In this freedom, moreover, there should be a sense of expansive happiness." Does this teaching seem self-centered? I'm not speaking of selfishness. Selfishness is the complete opposite of centeredness in the divine self. Yogananda praised divine selfishness as a key to right spiritual action. Always, he said, we should ask, what can I gain spiritually from this situation? For without inner development, what have we to give anyone? We are responsible above all for ourselves. That means, among other things, being responsible for our own reactions to life. If those reactions give us no inner happiness, it is a sure sign that we are misguided and will be of no use to us, or really to anyone else. So keeping watch over the reactions, like I said earlier, that's the battle we face every day. The battle that, like this song says, needs to be met with bravery and a sense of expansive, transcendent meaning. And by so living, then we may be sung of in the future as those warriors who confronted the foes of negativity and cynicism, of anger and selfishness, all the forces of darkness, confronted the Kauravas in the battle of Kurukshetra, fighting on the side of the Pandavas, and fighting against those forces that seek to bring us and the whole of the world down. So may we then, through that battle in ourselves, and whatever battles we may fight outwardly, defend what is holy and what is true. That is to say, defend higher consciousness, because that truly is our first duty to God.
The victories they win.